welcome to this episode of Cloudbusting, which we're doing live.
Hello, mate.
From Vegas.
How you doing? Hi, everyone.
Hi, how are you? Enjoying reInvent so far? Yeah. Cool. Who of you have heard a Cloudbusting podcast?
More
Excellent. That means we've got a lot more people that can listen to this. So we host a podcast called Cloudbusting. It's something that we did. We know there's a lot of technical podcasts out there, which is great, but what we wanted to do is something a little bit more infotainment-like. So we want to be able to reach a sort of a wider audience. We still want to talk about a serious message with cloud adoption, and the sort of ripple effect around that, but have a bit of fun doing it. So we came up with this podcast called Cloudbusting. We've been going about a year now. We've grown quite significantly, and we're very happy to be able to come to this session and actually try and do it live. We're doing it on stage, quite interesting. We don't get the ability to edit, which I think is a little bit worrying.
No, which is normally our saving grace.
Yeah. So, ways of introduction, my name's Jeremy Ward. I'm a cloud strategist with Cloudreach. My background, I've been a CIO for a couple of hotel chains and started using Amazon back in 2011, I think originally.
My name's Dave Chapman. I head up the Customer Transformations Group at Cloudreach and co-host Cloudbusting. My background is also enterprise IT. I've had about 20 years in large enterprises in energy, UK government, professional services.
Brilliant. And we're joined by two very special guests. So, Stuart.
Yeah, hi there, guys. I'm Stuart Fry from BP, responsible for enterprise IT these days, which sort of sounds semi-interesting probably, but that does include all of our.
It includes some cool stuff.
It does cool, and it includes all our cloud activity as well. And I've been in BP quite a while now. Worked across the whole business as a CIO, including our alternative energy business, which is really interesting for us at the moment.
Brilliant. And Ramin.
Sure. So Ramin Lamay with a company called Global Payments out of Atlanta. Been with the company for almost 10 years, a couple different roles, cloud and security over my tenure. And currently I'm responsible for cloud delivery, meaning the migration and workload creations moving from on-prem into cloud and really adopting the cloud-first approach.
Brilliant.
Yep.
So the normal episode that we have a few sort of sections to our podcast. Two areas we're going to try and touch today and have a little bit of interaction with you guys. Firstly, we have a thing called the Cloudy Cliffhanger. This is where I ask a fairly convoluted question that's normally stats-based, and our guests on the show have to guess, and it really is a guess in most cases. A little bit of fun, and then we'll sort of talk about that particular stat. So we're going to try and involve all of you in that. And the other thing we have is a thing called the 10-second recommendation, because we don't want it all to be about work. So we ask our guests on the show to recommend, within sort of 10 seconds, like a book, a film, a drink, a cocktail. We had a shark festival somebody went to, they recommended that. Sparkling Shiraz, I think Dave once mentioned and has never lived it down.
Much underrated. It's a much underrated beverage.
Anyone likes Sparkling Shiraz here? Yeah,
don't Australians usually like it. That's a safe audience for that.
So I would like you guys to think of something that if you, towards the end of the show, what we're going to do is chuck a couple of these GIFs that I went and scrounged off the expo floor this morning. We're going to be chucking them in. If you catch it, we'll come to you with a mic and just recommend something. You know, it's a great opportunity to share. And we'll be doing that towards the end. We're going to start with the Cloudy Cliffhanger.
Cloudy Cliffhanger. This is the bit.
So, normally it's a survey-based question, and I do have a survey that was done this year, so it's up to date, which is good. Unusual for me.
It's unusual. The accuracy I'll still doubt, but at least it's up to date.
I can even tell you that there were 473 respondents to this survey.
All of 470.
And they were all CEOs. So this is the Gartner CEO survey.
Okay.
Which I think is quite a well-known survey, and it's this year's version.
Yeah.
And they were asked a question. And the question that they were asked was, does your organization have a corporate digital initiative or transformation program?
Right.
Yeah?
This has got to be a high percentage, surely.
Well, you're starting there. So what I'd like everyone to do, if you could please all just stand up. I know you don't get to normally do this at a reInvent thing, but it's good for the exercise. Brilliant.
Very good.
So, my question is going to be, is it answer A, higher than 80%? Or is it answer B, less than 80%?
Right.
Okay? Let's say on the high it's 80% or higher for answer A.
So answer A is higher than 80%.
80% or higher.
Yeah. And answer
And answer
B
B is
below it.
79%
Or lower.
or lower.
Right. Very, very specific.
Very specific, yeah? So, Dave, what do you think it is?
A.
You think it's higher than 80%.
Yeah.
Okay.
That doesn't mean they all are being effective,
No.
but I bet they've all got.
Stuart,
I'm not sure they could spell what was in it, but I would say the same.
you're going to go for A as well,
I
are
am,
you?
yeah.
Okay. Ramin,
I will play devil's advocate and go for B.
you're going to go lower. Okay. Right, for those of you in the audience, if you think it's B, i.e. lower than 79% or lower, please sit down. Ooh, I think most of them are with you, Ramin.
I think so.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
Brilliant.
Good,
Well,
good crowd.
good crowd. Well, the correct answer is, you can all sit down now. Thank you for that. Much appreciated. The correct answer is, you're going to have to wait. It's the cliffhanger.
So I'm going to introduce trends, and what we're going to do here is I'm going to go through 6 trends, but we're going to do 2 at a time, and then as we finish the first 2, we're then going to have a bit of a conversation about it with our guests here, and our guests have both been through some very, very significant cloud transformation at very high volumes, so both have a huge amount of knowledge about what's involved in terms of not just the technical challenges in doing cloud transformation, but the impact cloud transformation has across your organization. And our position on this is that it's good to be intentional about your response to what cloud is going to do to your organization. So we're going to unpick that a little bit. You're doing the slides.
Sorry, forgot I'm doing the slides today.
You do normally tune out during my bit, so you're going to be on your toes. Right, so let's start with this. So we like the word adaptable, and we use the word adaptable as sort of a replacement for words like agile and words like digital. So when an organization is going into trying to respond to digital impact in their particular industry, or they're trying to do something within their organization to increase their pace of change, they've got to think about this from a stronger standpoint than purely tech alone. So why we find adaptable interesting is based off a piece of work that was done by the Harvard Business Review, and it's called A Leader's Guide for Decision Making. And in that Leader's Guide for Decision Making, there is a concept called the Cynefin framework, which is a Welsh spelled word, so it's not obvious to try and guess how that's spelled, but if you search for A Leader's Guide to Decision Making, you'll find it. And it describes the world in 2 states, a world of order and a world of chaos. And in the world of order, you've got a lot of repeatable process. So it's very clear, super level of unknowns, in fact 0 unknowns in a world of order. Building something more complicated in a world of order is also relatively straightforward. It might be a very hard thing to do, but we've done it as human beings a lot. So we can push our way through it without many unknowns as well. That's called a complicated way of working. And in a complicated way of working, you can plan very well. So for example, you can run an annual budget cycle. And you know that by the time you get to the end of the annual budget cycle, that what you hit there is still going to be relevant to you as a business. However, a lot of people at the moment are saying that world of business is not where we are these days, particularly as a result of digital disruption. That's a much more chaotic world. And in the world of chaos, you have chaos itself, which is battlefield conditions where you have to make sub-second decisions all of the time. You know, like if you're in a crisis mode or you have a cyber breach or something along those lines where you're not planning, you are in the moment making decisions. That's a chaos state. Well, the most interesting one is the world of complexity. And that exists between chaos and complication. And in the world of complexity, it's about shorter cycles. It's about provoking your market and then sensing its response, and then responding to that very quickly and very iteratively. So our hosts here at the moment on their commercial platform, Amazon.com, use a very similar set of techniques. So when they do 100 releases a day, they're not necessarily leaving that 100 releases out. It's a market test. They're seeing what their market likes, and then they're pulling it back in, modifying it, and then putting out new product. So our question is then, what does an organization need to do beyond the tech to become truly adaptable? But let's step back a bit and start the story about why IT where it is today. We describe this as the agility gap. And what was happening in early days of IT is IT was coming in and it was automating relatively straightforward internal tasks in an organization. And again, some of that might be quite difficult. It might be big ERP systems or something. And it might be something to do with pre-internet customer experience. And that was all going really, really quite well. But it got to a point where that was kind of almost done. And I know there's a lot of SAP installations that ran for a decade or something. But actually, the main benefits were getting resolved. And leadership in organizations were going, IT is actually getting really expensive. So they started to cost constrain IT around the late 90s millennium, and it became very much an efficiency mindset that was beginning to run IT. IT then moved into outsourcing, second generation outsourcing, third generation outsourcing, and during that it was not only stripping capability out of organizations, which would have allowed a faster response, but actually it was the tick speed of how those organizations were working were driven by the SLAs in those contracts and driven by the number of headcount that were working in certain bits of the business. So IT then, in an attempt to be efficient, in an attempt to manage its landscape, begun to do things like quarterly releases and annual releases. This was all happening at the same time the internet boom happened. And during the internet boom, the world of complex working and digital working, and then further driven by mobility, was actually increasing the rate of business innovation, just as IT speed was going in the other direction. So you then began to get a series of frustrations between business leaders and IT leaders in terms of IT not engaging with the business properly, becoming more of a services organization, and frustrations begin to emerge. The cloud. So after this, IT then began to start to adopt the cloud, and the first phases of real core scale cloud migrations were IT-led. And they were IT-led in a way that IT was trying to fix a bunch of the problems that were on the previous slide. So they were trying to come at it from an efficiency mindset perspective, and they were trying to use it in a technical way to increase rate of change. Frustrations with cloud migrations that get into a position where they all of a sudden look too expensive and they snarl up and don't move forward very well, and business loses confidence in them. It's principally because the business is not sensing any change in behavior or speed of response. So the business then, and whether this was airline magazines prompting this or other things happening, began to start to experiment around the edge. So they began to start to reach out directly to marketing agencies or SaaS providers directly, and begin to start to put in edge or business unit specific pieces of tech. So you now have a situation where the businesses are innovating their own tech, and IT is sitting in the middle trying to deal with very complex legacy, technical debt, and finding that hard to move. We think the third phase of cloud adoption is only really just beginning to start. And that's when you join all of that up and you begin to start to reorganize not only your IT, but your business in a way that can then truly begin to start to transform itself. Andy Jassy, in his keynote yesterday, began to start to request that us as a community start to educate their business leaders in what it's going to be required to change and begin to start to engage with business transformations much more fundamentally. So let's see how that showed up in places like BP and Global Payments. So Stuart, what resonated in that for you in terms of the journey that you guys have been on?
Well, I think the first one you covered a bit there, Dave, was this sort of view of doing projects. So certainly in sort of the energy industry, if you're going to build a wind farm or something, you sort of plan it out. Yeah. and culturally that's the way work was done. And IT projects looked a lot the same, yeah? You would sort of think you could predict what a wind farm could look like in an IT sense at the start, and of course when you got to the end that didn't happen. So the project sense, and also we'd found ourselves sort of outsourcing all of our IT work as a cost to be managed. And then of course digitization came upon us, and we found ourselves in a bit of a cultural problem where we'd sort of nearly, from an IT function perspective, declared that we weren't very relevant or capable. And so we've been growing that, moving more away from projects to products, getting our teams far more based around everything as a service. So everything we do as a service that owns the whole life cycle of what you do, and it's never finished yet.
Right.
Just an endless thing. And the other thing is I wouldn't actually blame any of our partners for what we did. You know, there's a few folks in the room. Is we actually asked them to just keep getting cheaper and do less and less. Yeah. So we sort of did it to ourselves, and then we said, well, that's not very, very good for what we wanted, which was something different. And our whole role with our partners now is completely different, being real tightly knit into our squads, and I think we all benefit from that.
Yeah, that's good.
And are you feeling that you get into that business freedom stage at the moment, or are you still
No,
still a little way to go?
I think as a company we would like to use good words like agility and mindset and other things. It's really hard to break out of this view that you can predict the future. And you can sort of get your head around it on features or outcomes, but like something like a budget, like it's like predict what you.
Yeah,
it's like okay, I know I'm going to get it wrong. But
what I found when I was originally experimenting with that way of working was that you're so trained and inoculated to hit a budget number at the end of an annual cycle, that when you actually question that, it almost feels like a dereliction of duty. It's like a deeply uncomfortable feeling. Ramin, what resonated with you in that?
You know, a lot. As I'm really relatively new in the cloud space. My program's been around for about a year, after about 2 years previous to my program, where different parts of IT have tried their hand at cloud. And to what Stuart mentioned, very much project-based, and each project had a different reason for wanting to go to cloud. Just backing up a bit, when I first joined my organization, we were about 3,000 employees, much smaller company about 10 years ago. Today, we're about 25,000 employees, and just much larger company due to organic growth and acquisitions. And acquisitions bring a different challenge to solve, where, you know, if cloud is done right, it can help optimize and reduce costs of these small local data centers. But we didn't take those approaches. So with the adoption of my program, we've been very much firefighting to just get a handle on putting things in the cloud and trying to figure out, well, how do you turn it into that next wave, that next era of adoption, where you have business metrics, you have things that you can measure and show value back to the organization, and really get out of being driven by IT and move towards the business and see what the business problems are, and figure out how to carve out your budgets from IT, including people, to really take a new approach to solving those.
Did you get a sense that sort of, you know, many years, maybe decades of underinvestment, technical debt, and under-integrated environments from acquisition were being visited on your cloud program?
Not yet. So I think I like to really call the phase we're still in very much experimental. I think this year with the adoption of the cloud delivery program, we proved a point saying you can use the cloud, but just by putting workloads in the cloud, you can't really see ROI. And ROI, for a company like mine, you know, that's very much a historic CapEx versus OpEx model. Cloud is not going to show you cost reduction or optimization or time to market in the same measurements that they're used to. Things cost more money to put in the cloud. They cost more to run up front as you build out your initial offerings. So longer term down the road, you can start solving business problems in a more different way, rather than just having someone from an application development team ask you to put their infrastructure in the cloud. Those are the least attractive scenarios for cloud adoption.
Perfect. So let's build on that, and let's build out from that a little bit. So IT then begins to start to adopt cloud, and it can see the business beginning to start to experiment around the edges. So to Stuart's point earlier, what does IT then need to do to contribute to that situation? Not necessarily from a, hey, I'm going to kind of land grab this situation back because I specifically want to own all of the tech. But actually, what does it mean to be an IT department in a transforming organization? So in looking at this, we reference another piece of work, and we reference a book by John Cotter called "That's Not How We Do It Around Here." And what Cotter talks about in that book are two different types of organization. He talks about the hierarchy, and the hierarchy is an extremely valid construct for complicated and ordered organizations where it's all about scale and where it's all about stability. So operations, operational work, that kind of thing, a hierarchy is absolutely fit for purpose. However, if you imagine a hierarchy in a triangular shape is actually deliberately difficult to try and move. It's a very stable shape. And the units that exist within a hierarchy are taking feeds downward and hitting targets as a result of doing that. Therefore, if something comes orthogonally into that organization, like, for example, some aspect of digital disruption, then that organization is not going to know what to do with that, because it might mean that they miss their annual target, and that becomes an actual governable problem in a hierarchy. So Cotter suggests a second type of organization called the network, and the network looks more like you would probably say a startup model looks. So it's very idea driven, and it's very solution specific, and it's very responsive. So it starts out with somebody going, I've got an idea to make a widget, I need to get Jim and Sally to come and help me with that, and they create a little network, and that network might look a little bit like a product team. So we think then when you apply cloud tech to something like a product team and some other ways of working like DevOps, which we'll come on to in a second, then you begin to start creating what we're beginning to refer to as micro businesses. And those micro businesses have full autonomy and empowerment to be able to respond to their market in the way that Amazon.com does, for example. So a business now, instead of beginning to look like a triangle, for certain sections of that business, it might look more like a network of empowered micro businesses. And to ensure that that network of empowered micro business doesn't just splurge and go in 1,000 different directions, because you are giving genuine autonomy to the product leaders in there, the sense of purpose in that organization needs to be recut in a way that becomes much more material and much more directional for people, as opposed to, we want to be the best IT organization in the world, and that then is like a cascaded, fairly pat statement. So adaptable organizations then need to begin to start to engage with the world outside of the hierarchy. Within one of those micro businesses, you will probably recognize this sort of structure. So this sort of structure is a product team that can go right from business innovation all the way through to underlying software-driven infrastructure in a DevOps style shape. The micro business themselves begin to start to look like this in their organizational construct. Where we think there is potentially some changes going to happen is at the moment there is a huge rush to re-insource IT people to fill out this entire pipeline. And we think that's a cyclical thing, in the sense that ultimately aspects of this, even SRE style services, are probably going to be consumable as managed services. And it's still relevant to ask yourself that, is it business relevant to have people doing containers-based work, and actually should they be further up the stack doing application-based work, microservices-based work, and business value-adding services? So Stuart, I know in BP you went heavily down the product structure, as you referenced earlier. How has that worked out for you, and what challenges have you had with it?
Yeah, and I think the starting point is, like, no one ever remembers the go live project date. Like no one ever remembers, like, even though you sort of work towards it.
Or it's a catastrophic day that everybody remembers for the wrong reason.
Yeah, and if you let a project go live when it's not ready, everyone remembers maybe the crap you've built. They never remember the go live date though. Yeah. But what we've worked out at BP is we've moved everything into a service, and by that these are multidiscipline teams, and they don't just include IT people. Yeah. Because if you put a multidiscipline team together to sort of exit a data center around IaaS, you'll probably just get a data center in the cloud.
Exactly.
Which isn't the point, really, which is one of your points you had up there, is actually you've got to bring in your product ownership from your businesses, what your outcomes you're trying to get to, make sure you're worrying about usability, I know like UX and other things, but whatever that is what is your purpose you're trying to get to? It has to be multidisciplined. And then how do you measure yourself on success? Like the old measures of IT are hopeless for that.
Right. Well, they're all efficiency driven, right? Mainly.
Like an SLA, what's that? Whoever cares about that?
Yeah, right, exactly.
But we've all written contracts and actually probably been managed to contracts where we think people do.
But it did hit moments of existential crisis, right? Where actually you begin to start to think, well, if IT was all about its previous set of metrics, what actually does it become about when you're on the other side of this transformation?
And you just measure different things. I think the other one you mentioned is about partnerships are quite different in multidiscipline teams. So I spoke a bit earlier today, and I had a slide up on the screen talking about a piece of activity we'd done within a squad, and it had Wipro and Infosys in the same picture. Yeah.
Right.
And you're like, what does that make sense? And it makes sense because they've each come into our squad and brought different capabilities to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And actually, even working with partnerships, that's completely changing. And this view of in-source, outsource is I think, is somewhat irrelevant. It's how does everyone bring a capability into solving a problem differently?
Yeah. And Ramin, in terms of your journey so far, how close have you got to product structures yet? Are you there yet?
You know, I feel we're on the cusp of transformation. And let me back up a bit and explain a little further. So in my journey this year, I've realized very quickly that the business does not care where IT services are coming from, cloud or agile, DevOps. They don't care about these terms. Now, there are challenges with that. The business assumes these terms in cloud just mean things get easier and cost less. So it's kind of counterintuitive.
Exactly.
And it puts different kinds of pressure on IT. What we are moving towards is really towards transformation. And I like to use a quote by Jason Silva, shake the snow globe. And what you have to do within the IT organization is realize the business is not necessarily going to give you the funding to do cloud the right way.
Yeah, right.
So you have to figure out how to carve people, budget, and different practices within IT and really have extreme focus on a few use cases to solve problems.
And that ends up being, I'm guessing, like you're making decisions that could be quite materially different to what you would have made historically. We've seen a thing that we call the ripple effect in customers, and what we mean by that is once you get the cloud running in a certain way, it begins to have material impacts on multiple other sections of your business and your IT that you might not even have predicted right back at the beginning of your journey.
And even to go further on what you just mentioned, it can get complex very quickly when you have different IT folks involved in making those decisions. That's when you adopt all 3 cloud providers, and for some reason that sounds like a good idea to start off your journey. And then someone says private cloud, and people jump towards that wagon as well.
Right.
Tools is a whole nother mess where there's different philosophies between the IT organizations on what do they want to use, cloud native or third parties. So I think it's very important, to reiterate on your journey, don't just jump into what IT or different use cases are. Step back and figure out how can you provide more value in a quicker fashion with extreme focus, meaning solve one pattern and figure out, with a good partner that's okay with being the guinea pig and going through that journey with you, figure out, how beyond just IT, it impacts the business through measuring the different efficiencies or costs or time to market that it could provide, and then slowly expand that pattern out.
Yeah, I think what's important about that kind of lighthouse approach to getting the business to understand and engage with what you're trying to do is that you actually don't lowball that and pick like a dev test environment, because actually that doesn't end up demonstrating anything, right?
Yep, absolutely. One of the most successful use cases we've identified this year was an example of a lift and shift that came to us that I just refused to put into the cloud.
Right.
Instead, what I decided to do is play it out with them, right? Go sit at the table with the business, not with IT, excluding my counterparts in IT, go sit at the table and figure out what is it that they're trying to do. And we actually turn it into, we're going through an integration, so we turn it into a synergy opportunity because we spend a little bit more time and effort and realize, hey, they're using a third-party app, and it doesn't really require IaaS. Their application off the shelf adopts PaaS services. So you can automatically reduce your costs, and on top of that, the third-party software provider along with the cloud provider have already created your scripts to build your pipelines, your infrastructure as code. So the cost to build just went significantly down as well, just by putting a little bit more investment into the business problem that they're trying to solve and asking those difficult questions versus just being an order taker.
Very cool.
I think the build I would say as well that we saw, we started with some of the things Andy Jass said, I saw the keynote yesterday, which was, so we sort of made these big declarations, cloud first company, shut our mega data centers, which gets you started, but you do have to commit. If you just play around the edges, you find yourself in this horrible no man's land, and some of it's just unpredictable about the things you'll find out. And you know, we've got 2,000 applications now in the public cloud, and you know, an example of something we're doing at the moment is we're using, because we've got a lot of cloud understanding now, we've sort of moved along your chart there a little bit, and you know, we're just running some things like AWS Kinesis at the moment, doing, you know, we're looking at how dirty your car is in a retail site. Like, you could never have done a business case on that, and we use Kinesis for that, and video footage, and then we might sell you a car wash,
Right, that's clever.
You could never, you couldn't, when you laid out what you were going to do, just as an example, it's just something you build, and don't try and write it in a business case, you can never, there's just new things that are enabled, and what you see with partners like AWS and others is the speed of this other products and features are just, like, the opportunity is endless, but if you have the foundation building blocks there, you can exploit them. And that's the feature bit that even a project you would never be able to design.
Yeah, and what's amazing about that story and the journey that you guys are going on, I know you've got a plethora of other examples, is that you're actually now beginning to edge on that business freedom piece where not only are you getting new opportunities to do things that you probably never would have envisaged or been able to deliver, but presumably you can deliver them a hell of a lot faster to the market than you would have been able to before.
Yeah, and do you know, the hardest thing is, from a cloud engineering perspective, is keeping up. Our own capabilities, the art of the possible of our partners in our service teams now, who are the business product owners, they're endless ideas, and it's now a problem of the ideas are running away from our ability to even execute with our teams, and then the AWSs of this world are releasing features all the time. It's a treadmill that's really fast.
It's tough stuff. So in our journey towards being adaptable, then we've talked a little bit about what you need to do to get your organization in the right shape, and ultimately that's not where people typically start. So people will typically start with launching into the technology, like I said, and then trying to go back around to sort out the organization. What we advise now, having been on a number of these journeys with customers and experienced them ourselves, is actually the organization is almost the first place you need to start before you get to the tech. And in the tech, a number of you guys are probably more than well aware of this, but new style architectures allowing fast innovation becomes very, very important. In this particular architecture, it's a data-centric architecture with a platform, orchestrated microservices, and then multi-channel at the front end. That multi-channel becomes a really important aspect of the architecture, and being able to get involved in and understand your user experience, and then innovate very quickly at the channel level without disrupting your underlying architectures becomes very, very quick ways to go to market. And you can see that happening in most major platforms that you would engage with in your sort of shopping life today, let's say. And then finally, just to touch on things like Outpost. So the cloud previously was a situation where it was very purist in its view, and Cloudreach shared for the first 10 years of its existence a very purist view of what the public cloud was actually about. The public cloud meant, to Stuart's point, don't just dump your technical debt over onto the public cloud. Do some refactoring at minimum to get your tech onto the cloud in a way that you can manage in a cloudified way. But actually what then began to start to happen is some organizations, whether they got stuck on their journey or frankly just couldn't afford it,
left a load of their technical debt in the data center, and then begun to start to use words like hybrid, as if that then sort of slightly disguised the fact that all they'd done is bottle out of moving technical debt or not managed to make the business case work. And we didn't see that as legitimate architecture. However, what's happened, I think, because of things like regulation and because of organizations, rightly or wrongly, and it's debatable, wanting to keep certain aspects of their infrastructure locally in their data centers, the CSPs begin to start to respond to that, and you get Stack, and you get Kubernetes, and you get things like Outpost. What's interesting about leveraging those things is that you still have to do the migration to them. So when you get that in your data center, you still got to think about how you're cloudifying your applications and getting them onto those platforms to then be able to manage a true, legitimate hybrid cloud. We're quite excited about the possibilities that brings. And equally, I would include in that definition edge or fog computing, depending on what you want to use it. And the reason I say that is because it's broadly built of the same stuff. It might be an outpost, it might be an outpost service, but you still may be running it on your sites. You know, you might be running it near a trading floor, or you might be running it on an oil field. You still got to find a place to house that piece of equipment. So from you as a customer, you're still kind of managing some aspect of tin and finding a place for that tin. But what it then gives you, of course, is a completely different set of architectural possibilities that wouldn't have been possible in remote geographic locations and very, very low latency tolerant businesses. So we think that edge and next generation hybrid give us some really interesting architectural possibilities when you're beginning to think about app design. And Stuart, let's maybe start there, because the business you're in is in some extremely complex geographic locations. Where are you guys on your journey in here?
Yeah, so I think it's, so we've got a lot of places in the world where, you know, say in Angola, we've got a lot of facilities like 250 miles offshore, yeah, like bobbing around in miles of water on pretty bad connectivity, but very complex ideas and use cases you can do out on the edge with IoT and other things. It is really seducing and tempting to just go and stick some x86 boxes out there. Yeah? Like you just think, well, you know, the cloud is this other place. But actually it comes back to what we talked about earlier, is if you're thinking about things like from an IaaS view, you would do that, yeah? You would do it and you try and technically get around that. You know, the art of the possible from Outpost or another vendor in Seattle who has another product. You know, the art of the possible there is if you can have that visionary point about you know, putting an install in, thinking about the art of the possible with S3 out there, or the IoT suite that's just going to come within the stack is that visionary point of looking forward. I think the other point you raised about platforms is also critical, is in a services team, and what we've seen is they can become real silos. So the power of them is they get focused. The danger is, as an enterprise, there are two things that you always, you know, keeping an eye on. One is scale. Experiments are real easy. Yeah. Interesting experiments like the one I said earlier, yeah, that is completely hopeless to anyone unless you can scale it. And that's where platforms are absolutely vital. Yeah, they are the power that allows you to scale. And if you're a big enterprise, which is probably different from a startup and a smaller, that is where you're going to get your value as you transform your business. And you have to underpin with that. And then the other one is you've got all those other things that you do care about, you know, which you're trying to keep a little bit of control on: security, cost, yeah? It's not free-for-all forever.
Yeah, right.
And platforms give you just a big view of how you get after that. So I think we see both opportunities for both of those. Really tempted to just get suckered into innovation at all costs, but actually at the end of the day,
you still got to manage the thing.
You're a viable business.
Yeah. And Ramin, going back to the previous slide on platforms and user experience, where are you guys in terms of considering user experience as a core part of your business design?
You know, I think it's still a little early for us to be focused on user experience, especially being a multi-cloud provider.
Right.
I think really we're trying to take a step back and figure out, you know, what are the use cases that we want to initially solve. And a company that's grown through acquisitions, we do have a lot of pockets of IT and parts of our business that it could be either on very old technology or underfunded technologies where it can enable their business. So the approach that we're taking is a little bit more, as I mentioned earlier, very focused towards certain use cases and patterns that we want to solve for, and then build momentum, right?
Right.
In parallel, we would have to also scale the cloud delivery teams that are responsible for this. Today, it's not a very large team, and the adoption process that we've taken is let's rebadge or reconvert people within the IT organization into these roles and invest in their training. So we need to adopt a program where we can scale it, kind of to your point, Stuart, at a rate where we can also operate it and show value back to the organization. And we initially started off by doing too many different use cases and really not seeing a lot of reusable work, and having a harder time operating what we put out there, where we want to really change that approach to be more focused, where we would love to come out of a data center in some of our remote locations and put it in the cloud. But the challenge is, coming out of a data center, especially for a business that's kind of self-sustained, you have to solve a lot of different problems, right?
Yeah.
And you don't want to take those type of problems on initially as you're getting really your momentum under you to start scaling and get people and budget to really scale with you.
You really, when you get into that situation, you're unearthing kind of so many dead bodies from the organization that I think one of the biggest untalked about issues right now that cloud transformation is beginning to start to bubble up, but it's not really that heavily reported, is global technical debt.
Absolutely.
And I mean, we did a version of the podcast recently on technical debt just by itself, and a sense that actually, if you fully value in a medium-sized business, if you actually value that business's technical debt, it could well put the business out of business. So if there was a regulation change, say in a highly regulated industry, where the technology was, kind of life-threatening, particularly in complex work areas, if, say, a regulator came along and said, you have to be N-1, or everything that you do in your entire estate needs to be under complete live service, the ability to be able to then actually respond to that would be crippling for a lot of organizations. If you take that then and you say, okay, let's do a cloud transformation, and by the way, as part of that cloud transformation, we're going to solve our technical debt problem. That is do not underestimate the scale of challenge that's going to bring to your organization. It's well worth doing, and I think we'd probably all at this table recommend considering a minimum of some basic refactoring, but it is a very considerable challenge. We were talking about on the way over that actually sometimes the best answer is just to switch stuff off.
Yeah. See who complains.
Well, we were saying earlier that so we've done no lift and shift of our 2,000 apps yet. Everything has gone through some level of small transformation. It could have just been move the OS up to we only run the two most recent versions of an OS at a minimum. From a database perspective, if we can, we move it over to RDS or Amazon Aurora or another product.
Right.
Or we do re-engineering. But by forcing it through that, we've rationalized nearly 30% out of our first data center, because you just make it like a bit too hard and a bit too expensive, and people see the view through it, and that nearly funds other things, and you have to do it. And there's lots of products out there who want to try and move your on-premise world to the cloud, and to me and to us, it just doesn't make any sense to us, because why would you expect a different outcome? That's sort of a version of insanity, I would think.
Right.
But I can also see why you would do it if it was at the end of your migrations, you had like stuff left, you're thinking,
just get rid of it,
and we'll work it out afterwards. So I can see why you would do that. I don't think you would ever want to start there.
No. So look, let's just bring this to a close by just summarizing then the ingredients that we think go into what being a truly adaptable organization actually contends. So it's not just a cloud transformation. It is a cloud transformation that's going to have an impact, and you need to be thoughtful about kind of the very nature of what your organization is doing, minimum at IT organization level. A cloud transformation and this sort of work cannot be buried in one of the units of an organization, and actually it's not even a terrifically good idea to keep it as a separate transformation program, though God knows we've all done that in the past. But actually the reality of that is it doesn't really integrate very well, and this becomes a very holistic conversation. And then to push really into the world of business experimentation and into the world of business freedom, it requires some really brave and courageous conversations with the top of your organizations to get them to reframe how they're thinking about themselves, to reframe how they're actually running their organization, what the tick speed of that organization is, and what really the purpose of that organization is.
Brilliant. Thank you. Great insights there. So I know you've all been desperate to know what the answer to the cloudy cliffhanger was.
We will remember even what it was. About 3 weeks ago at this point.
Put you out of your misery. So the question I asked was, this came from a survey by Gartner, the Gartner CEO survey, 473 respondents.
Precisely.
Got the precise.
Yeah, precisely. How many did they send it out to? Like 20,000? I think it 473 back.
I don't know, yeah. It's a good question. Could ask them next time we sit down.
Yeah, let's sit down.
They were asked, does your organization have a corporate digital initiative or a transformation program? And they came back and there was a percentage response rate. And I asked you, was it higher than 80% or lower than 80%? And I think that in the room, probably the majority was it's lower. Oh, yeah. Stuart and Dave, you were both on the high side. Yeah. And Ramin, you were on the low. If I was to tell you that in 2018, the actual response was 60. They were asked the same question, exactly the same question. It was 62%.
Right.
How are you feeling now? Still confident?
I'm never confident about these things. I'm going to remain confident. Let's do that. Let's remain confident.
Well, good, because you're actually right for once. It's actually 82% of respondents came back. So I was quite surprised it was that high, especially given how low it was.
So the reason I thought quite immediately it was going to be high is the bandwagon-esque aspect of it, which is you almost have to have in your corporate strategy, yeah, we're looking at digital. The people don't necessarily know what that means.
Yeah,
and they certainly don't necessarily embrace digital in a way that's, if you think about, again, enterprise-level, actual full business pivots, so organizations that are not just messing around doing a bit of edge experimentation, but actually they're changing the very purpose of their business as a result of digital giving them new frontiers and new possibilities. The only one that I can really think of is like something like Netflix, moving from a physical media distribution company to being a content creation company as a result of revenues driven by swapping their underlying technologies. That's super interesting, and they've embraced that in a way that's really useful. That's a digital transformation.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it might sound like we've contrived this, but I promise you we haven't. I actually picked up a couple of other stats from that survey, and one of them was the word digital when used when describing top 5 business priorities. In 2012, it was only 2.1%. In 2019, it's up at 18.6%. Yeah. So there's that big rise. But what was also interesting, and I'm actually quite amazed by this, they were asked what they thought about how strong they were at harvesting these digital results that they were sort of looking for. Yeah. And of the CEOs asked, 23% of them said it's very effective, right? But the CIOs in the same organization, it was actually only 6% that said it's very effective.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
So the CEOs have they've probably got their heads in the sand a little bit, thinking, oh, we're digital and it's all doing fantastically well. But actually not. So yeah, I thought that was a really good insight into that.
And I think it's a much overused word, you know what I mean? Digital doesn't necessarily mean anything by itself, which is why we contrived to use the word adaptable to try and describe what it really fundamentally means, which is changing the very nature and ethos of your business as a result of new technical possibilities.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you've done some pretty interesting stuff with some of the agreements that you've made that I don't think you can actually talk about yet, but that you pushed into making, what would have been IT arrangements that have got much bigger value for you as an organization, I think. I'm not forcing you to talk about it because I know you can't declare it yet.
No, we did this morning. So
how did that show up then?
Yeah, so one of those things we announced it this morning was, we're going to partner with AWS Exes in our biggest data center, which is in Europe. And we've sort of gone all in with AWS, and that's going to be 900 business critical apps. In the past, we've worked dual cloud and other things, and we do have that, but a single partner for that. But what we're strongly linked up here is us helping provide them back some renewable power. And that's our business, yeah. And that's sort of, firstly, that's a good thing. We've both got big ambitions there. That's not something that AWS is very good at, yeah. But they're a massive consumer of power, and anyone who's on AWS, so are you. And so for us, we provide them the power, they provide them also back the technology, and it benefits other customers as well. And it's just us coming together as a different community to support different business models, yeah, which in the past we'd never have done that as IT. We'd have gone out and said, give it to us as cheap as you can. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
We would never have thought about these broader opportunities that all of our business, and everyone probably has a business model that helps everybody. And I think this community that comes together through digital, not just through technology, is going to be so important to the future in the way open source has played from a coding perspective, just the art of the possible of exposing your data, the things you'd have thought were your crown jewels.
Yeah.
You just think completely differently, and it will take courage, real courage to lean into that, but the opportunities are massive.
Perfect.
So, brilliant. Thank you. TSRs, and well done to all of those who got it right. Commiserations to those who didn't. The TSRs now. So we, as mentioned at the beginning, 10-second recommendations. I'm going to ask the guys up on stage, and then I'm going to chuck a couple of throw them all out, a couple of these out to anyone who might want to catch one, and we'll come over with the mic and just give a quick recommendation. But Dave, what's your TSR for the week?
So I'm gonna go for a book that I've been harping on about for years, and I covered in the overview there, which is John Cotter's "That's Not How We Do It Around Here." It introduces profoundly different ways to think about how your organizations can work, and helps you frame for the complex conversations that you're going to need to have with leadership. It helps you explain to them that hierarchy is not the only way.
Stuart.
I'm going to take a slightly different track, because I've been jet lagged to hell since I've been here. So I keep waking up really early. And I would say, if you want to go out running on the strip, go out before 5 a.m. because there are people around, the lights still flash, but you can actually get up and down pretty easily. So that's my recommendation.
Brilliant. Robin.
I'll take a cue out of Dave's book. Really recommend a book that's been impactful to me. It's called The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek.
Oh, right. Yes, I know that guy.
It came out this year, and I think it's a brilliant book for anyone that's going to take a leadership role for cloud transformation. It really helps you learn the language on how to talk to executives and explain the difference between a finite game that comes to an end and how you manage those type of situations versus an infinite game where it's ongoing over a period of time, and you can't look at both scenarios being the same and manage them the same way. So I think it's a very good book for arming you with the right skill sets to have those conversations up.
Yeah. I think it also reframes how you think about stuff when you play in the infinite game. It's really good on that. Jez.
So I'm going to film. I went to cinema the other day to see, in the UK it's called Le Mans 66, but I think over here it's Ford versus Ferrari. Fantastic film, really good all the way through. It doesn't put either Ford or Ferrari in a particularly good light, but just really great story, really well acted, and even you don't have to be a car fan to enjoy it.
No, I took my kids to see it. They loved it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Right, let's see if this is going to work. So, Dave and I are just going to quickly jump in. Could you guys just chuck a couple of these things in?
I'm not sure it's appropriate to throw a rubber sumo at someone. So I'm going to throw a heart because I feel on.
Yeah, that's nice.
If anyone actually wants
my natural place, so I'm going to try and get it. Oh no, have I hit anyone? Oh, really hit him on that.
Oh, you can pick it up.
Go, grab it.
Sorry.
Right. Coming round.
I'll get it. And we'll push it back.
So we're going to ask you. So, what are you going to recommend to the crowd? I did warn you all to think of one at the beginning.
This often happens. And people blank the second.
Speakers while working out. You could live stream it, and then you could work out. So you could, it kind of goes along with the 5 a.m. runs that he was talking about.
Excellent.
That's perfect. Like that. Brilliant. Thank you. Chuck another one out.
Go for it.
No, I've got a missile or a sumo.
Right. Who was that closest to? That looked like it was quite close to you.
Oh, I don't have one. Oh, man.
I think you lost your crowd.
Oh, Summit IPA from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Perfect. There we go. Thank you.
Tweet one. LinkedIn it.
So that brings us towards the end. What we would like to say is a massive thank you to our guests, and we also have the podcast. It'd be great if you could subscribe, rate, review, and thank you all for your time today. It's been fantastic.